Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has announced new sanctions against Iran. The curbs target Iran's defense ministry and 27 other officials associated with Iran's atomic energy organization. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has also been blacklisted for allegedly flouting UN arms embargo with Iran. Bahrain says its move to establish ties with Israel is not against any country, but aimed to bring about a lasting peace in the region. In a statement, King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa reiterated Bahrain's support for the Palestinians as well as the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative. Bahrain and the UAE's deal with Israel is part of a diplomatic push by the US to integrate the Jewish state into the Middle East. Belarus opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has urged the EU to approve sanctions on officials accused of rigging last month's presidential election. Speaking to the media ahead of EU foreign ministers' meeting in Brussels, she said Europe must not support the Belarusian government financially. A wave of protests has gripped Belarus since the controversial re-election of President Alexander Lukashenko last month. The coronavirus has infected over 31 million people, claiming more than 961,000 lives across the globe. The US is the worst hit country, followed by India and Brazil. India's caseload is nearing 5.5 million, with the death toll approaching 88,000. In Pakistan, 4 more people have lost their lives to the disease, with the death toll at 6,420. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has announced new sanctions against Iran. The curbs target Iran's defense ministry and 27 other officials associated with Iran's atomic energy organization. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has also been blacklisted for allegedly flouting UN arms embargo with Iran. The curbs were announced by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, flanked by other top officials in a press conference at the State Department. The sanctions back a U.S. assertion that all UN sanctions against Iran are now restored. Other signatories to the 2015 nuclear deal, such as France and the UK, dispute the unilateral imposition of UN sanctions on Iran. China and Russia also oppose the US sanctions. Bahrain says its move to establish ties with Israel is not against any country, but aimed to bring about a lasting peace in the region. In a statement, King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa reiterated Bahrain's support for the Palestinians as well as the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative. Bahrain and the UAE's deal with Israel is part of a diplomatic push by the US to integrate the Jewish state into the Middle East. Earlier, Palestine's Prime Minister Mohammed Shatai said the U.S. is aiming for imposing an economic and political blockade on the country. Speaking at a cabinet meeting in Ramallah, Shatai said U.S. President Donald Trump has admitted that he cut aid to Palestine and prevented some Arab countries from fulfilling their obligations towards Palestine. Palestinians have slammed the recent normalization deals with Bahrain and the UAE with Israel as betrayal of their cause. Qatar says it stands by Palestinians and the long-standing conflict with Israel can only be resolved by addressing its root causes. The statement comes days after the signing of the US-brokered UAE-Israel normalization deal. Qatar's Foreign Affairs Ministry said it will spare no effort to ease the suffering of the Palestinians until they get their rights. Doha called for an end to Israeli occupation and establishment of sovereign Palestinian state within the framework of the UN Security Council resolutions. It said all Palestinian refugees elsewhere should be granted the right of return to their homeland. Recently, Bahrain became the latest Arab country to establish diplomatic ties with Israel, which the Palestinians called a stab in the back. In Afghanistan, 5 soldiers have been killed in an attack on a national directorate of the security checkpoint in northern Balkh province. A spokesman for the Balkh governor has blamed the Taliban for the attack. The Taliban have not claimed the responsibility of the attack so far. On Sunday, Afghan government officials confirmed civilian casualties in airstrikes on a Taliban base in Kunduz. However, the Taliban said 40 civilians were killed in the air raids. The spike in violence comes amid ongoing peace talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government in Doha. U.S. envoy Zalmay Khalilzad, in a tweet on Sunday, called on all the sides to reduce violence. Beijing has reiterated that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China and denied the so-called midline principle in the Taiwan Strait. The remarks followed a statement by Taiwan claiming its military has the right to self-defense and counterattack amid harassment and threats. At a press briefing, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said the recent U.S. officials' visit to Taiwan violated the One China policy agreed by Washington in 3 joint communiques. Wang urged the U.S. to abide by its commitment and stop any official contact with Taiwan. He said the move has seriously damaged the peace and stability of the Taiwan Strait. Earlier, Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party's president said Beijing is a threat to the entire region. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga and the U.S. President Donald Trump have discussed to strengthen their alliance during a phone talk. This is Suga's first interaction as the new premier with the U.S. President since taking the office. Speaking to the media afterwards, Suga said a mutual consensus was reached with Trump to further develop the bilateral ties. The new premier said the alliance of the two countries was the foundation of regional peace and stability. He said they agreed to coordinate closely on issues including the coronavirus situation and North Korea. Earlier in the day, Suga also had a phone conversation with Australian counterpart Scott Morrison. Russia says there is very little chance of extending the New START nuclear treaty with the US as it does not accept Washington's conditions. This comes after the US envoy for arms control said Moscow must accept a joint agreement between the US presidential elections. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said Washington's position constituted an ultimatum which lowers the chances of reaching any kind of agreement. The New START Accord limits the number of strategic nuclear warheads that Russia and the US can deploy. The nuclear arms control pact between Russia and the US is set to expire in February. Failure to extend it would remove the main pillar maintaining the balance of nuclear arms between the two countries. Russian and the Turkish militaries have held a joint training drill in the de-escalation zone in the Syrian province of Idlib. A spokesperson for the de-escalation zone's coordination center said the aim of the drill is enhancing coordination between Turkish and the Russian militaries. He said the drills will prepare the militaries to face emergency situations such as attacking militant convoys. He said coordination of military personnel and the procedure for organizing communication on the route using special signals were worked out. Idlib remains one of the 4 de-escalation zones in Syria established by Russia, Iran and Turkey back into 2017. Greece's government spokesman Stelios Pestas says Athens is close to resuming talks with Turkey over maritime zones. This comes after Ankara recalled an oil and gas exploration vessel from disputed Mediterranean waters in a move welcomed by Athens. The spokesman added that Ankara had also indicated its wish for a resumption of talks. Previous discussions between Athens and Ankara on demarcating their maritime zones broke down in 2016. Greek media say the exploratory talks could start as early as this week. NATO members Turkey and Greece disagree over maritime jurisdiction and energy exploration rights in the eastern Mediterranean. Belarus opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has urged the EU to approve sanctions on officials accused of rigging last month's presidential election. Speaking to the media ahead of the EU foreign ministers meeting in Brussels, she said Europe must not support the Belarusian government financially. EU member states have not yet given approval to a final list of some 40 Belarusian officials to be targeted. Earlier, Belarus warned the EU against inviting Tikhanovskaya to the meeting, saying the participation will be deemed as interference in its domestic affairs. A wave of protests has gripped Belarus since the controversial re-election of President Alexander Lukashenko last month. The coronavirus has infected over 31 million people, claiming more than 961,000 lives across the globe. The US is the worst hit country, followed by India and Brazil. India's caseload is nearing 5.5 million, with the death toll approaching 88,000. More in this report.
The rising number of coronavirus infections has once again put the governments across the world in a chaos. London Mayor Sadiq Khan says fast action is needed to halt the worsening spread of COVID-19 in the city as cases spike. In Spain's capital, Madrid, nearly 1 million residents are bracing for a partial lockdown, with several hundred marching in protest. Meanwhile, Australia's coronavirus hotspot of Victoria reported its lowest daily rise in infections in 3 months. State Premier Daniel Andrews said there were no plans yet to ease restrictions sooner than expected.
This is not just a good day, this is a great day. We are seeing these numbers come down, this strategy is working. All of us have to stay the course though, because if we were to open up right now, these numbers are still too high.
The World Health Organization has endorsed African herbal medicines as potential treatments for the coronavirus and other epidemics. This comes as health authorities in Tunisia and Bahrain reported additional coronavirus fatalities. Lebanon also added 1,006 new cases and 11 deaths in the last 24 hours, in a new record for the crisis-hit country. As the pandemic affects daily lives and economy, activists fear the virus may drive up child exploitation cases as well.
But the biggest threat is that millions of children may fall back into slavery, trafficking, child labor, child marriages. School would be denied. So it's a big threat. It never happened in my life, but neither in the lives of anyone in the past decades. So it's a very serious problem, especially for children.
South Korea has extended level 2 social distancing for a week and may tighten limits for the Chuseok holiday, when people traditionally reunite with families.
Clinical trials of the new coronavirus vaccine proposed by a well-acclaimed international company will start in Pakistan this week. Chairman of the Prime Minister's Task Force on Science and Technology, Dr. Ataur Rahman says the International Center for Chemical and Biological Sciences in Karachi has been approved for conducting the vaccine trials. Dr. Rahman said the COVID-19 vaccine will be available in the country next year between April and June, depending on the success of the trials. Meanwhile, 4 people have died from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, bringing the country's death toll to 6,420. The Health Ministry says 633 people tested positive for the virus overnight. It said the country has 7,015 active cases with over 306,000 total confirmed cases. The ministry said over 292,000 people have recovered so far. India's parliament has passed new farm bills, with the opposition calling them anti-farmer and pro-corporate. Prime Minister Narendra Modi hailed the legislation, saying it was a watershed moment for agriculture in India. But Indian opposition said the new bills will diminish the farmers' bargaining power. 12 opposition parties also moved a no-confidence motion against the deputy chairman of the upper house of the parliament. They said Harivansh Narayan Singh violated the parliamentary procedures in trying to pass the farm sector bills in haste. 10 people have been killed after a three-story building collapsed in India's southwestern Maharashtra state. The National Disaster Response Force said around 25 others are feared trapped under the rubble. The official said over 40 emergency workers are present at the scene. Witnesses say at least 20 people were rescued by the locals and 31 by rescue teams. The rescuers also managed to save a child from the rubble. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Greece, 3 people have died as Storm Lanos battered central and the western parts of the country. The storm triggered landslides, forcing authorities to shut down schools in the area. Emergency services said they received over 2,000 calls for rescue operations throughout Greece. They said 896 rescue missions have been completed so far. Earlier, a medical center and main roads collapsed in the Kardesta region after Lanos caused a river to overflow its banks. Cyclone Lanos uprooted trees and caused power cuts on the Ionian Islands and the western Peloponnese. China's first Mars probe, Tianwen-1, has completed its second orbit adjustment to better continue its flight to the planet. The adjustment came after some deviation of the probe from its orbit after a long time unpowered flight. Chief designer of Tianwen-1, Dong Jie, said 4 engines of the probe worked simultaneously for 20 seconds to complete the adjustment. He said the mission performed the engine startup and shut down as expected. Jay said they will further evaluate the effects of the orbit adjustment, including accuracy based on the positioning results in the future. So far, the probe has traveled about 160 million kilometers and 19 million kilometers away from the Earth. It will travel for another 5 months before it approaches Mars. Malaysia ranks as the 8th among the top 10 countries with mismanaged plastic waste in the world. To clean the Malaysian oceans from plastic, some volunteers have taken up a step to gather ocean-bound plastic for recycling. What in this report?
Increasing consumption of single-use plastics has polluted the environment, which is choking marine life and destroying the oceans on the planet. A World Wildlife Fund report says Malaysia is a top plastic consumer in Asia. Some volunteers has taken up the responsibility to clean Malaysia's ocean from plastic. They gather ocean-bound plastic that can eventually be transformed into pellets, which are modified into auto parts, home appliances and furniture. They're eventually sold to dozens of companies.
Everything is wrapped in plastic these days, so it's incredibly hard. So with recycling, it's all well and good to, clean up the environment and recycle them into usable items that people can make money off. But it's never going to actually stop the situation if you don't tell people to stop using the plastic first and actually deal with the problem of it getting into the environment in the first place.
Heng Hiap Industries is also working with environmentalists to collect and remove plastic waste from Malaysian waters. It recycles 60,000 tons of plastic each year.
And because we see that marine pollution is becoming a problem, and we decided to focus in ocean-bound plastic material. With this, we are able to serve the conscientious consumer who are basically buying products that ranges from automotive, from home appliance, from furniture.
Plastic pollution is a global problem that needs to be taken up in a sustainable manner. Malaysia plans to address single-use plastics by encouraging the plastic industry to transition to eco-friendly products.
The return of the tourists to Egypt's resorts and ancient sites is facing a tough winter season. Officials say tourist sites and hotels are subject to strict controls amid the coronavirus pandemic. More in this report.
The reopening of pyramids of Giza after a coronavirus break witnessed just a handful of tourists. Those entering the country are required to take PCR tests. As sites in Luxor across the River Nile from the Valley of the Kings reopened on September 1st, a single group of only 12 tourists visited. This year, 10% less tourists than the last year visited the country.
This virus came about and ruined everything. There was tourism and things were operating when things were good. After it has all become what you see now, total ruin.
The state has moved to protect the sector with emergency funding. More than 9,000 registered tour guides will receive £500 monthly until the end of the year. Tourism firms are also pleading for exemptions on some fees to be extended. Officials said Egypt was losing around $1 billion each month after the sector shut down from March when the coronavirus pandemic struck.
I really think that we cannot sit and wait until this virus will be completely finished. But you can come and you can be protected because you can enjoy the magic and you touch the pyramid and you follow the mummies coming from Cairo Museum to go to the Civilization Museum.
Tourism accounts for up to 15% of Egypt's national output. Government officials say they are making every effort to reassure tourists about their safety and encourage them to visit in the hope that the sector will revive gradually.
A Brazilian wheelchair-bound man has efficiently proven to be differently able. Juliano Durelio is a local celebrity in downtown Sao Paulo, famous for beating the odds and coming out stronger than ever. What about this delivery man in this report?
Durelio zips around Sao Paulo, bringing meals to hungry customers. But unlike other food delivery men, he does not ride a bike to weave his way through the hectic streets of Brazil's megacity. 5 years ago, an accident dramatically changed Durelio's life. Since he finally embraced his wheelchair as a source of strength rather than a sign of his disability, he hasn't looked back.
I tried to commit suicide 3 times and it didn't happen. Thank God. I don't regret it because life goes on, and today I am very happy. My wife is by my side helping me out, making me stronger, always providing me with moral support. When my life changed, after accepting that I would live in a wheelchair, I remember I looked at the wheelchair and spoke to it. If I'm going to live with you, then I'm going to live. I want to see if you can handle me because I'm going to handle you. I want to see if you can take me.
Durelio says he raised about $2,200 to adapt his motorbike to fit his wheelchair and in preparation for his job as a delivery man. He has been delivering food for some 6 months now, just about when the pandemic brought much of Brazil to a halt. But he is thankful for the daily grind of his job for getting him through tough times economically and emotionally.
The job of a delivery man is not made for us wheelchair users. I am in this situation today, working as a delivery man, overcoming obstacles, overcoming challenges. Because us wheelchair users are not useless. We are not disabled, we are able to do things, we are capable of everything. We just have to run after it.
The delivery man says he has never been discriminated against and nobody has ever treated him disrespectfully. He is not getting too rich, but his life has been on the up.
Around 270 whales have stranded on a sandbar of the remote west coast of the Australian island of Tasmania. Marine biologists have started rescuing them. Officials said at least 25 of the pilot whales have already died. Pilot whales are a species of oceanic dolphin that grows 7 meters long and can weigh up to 3 tons. Tasmania's Department of Water and Environment said the whales were stranded in 3 groups in shallow water at the Macquarie Heads. Scientists had first thought that the mass stranding involved about 70 whales when it was viewed by the air, but a closer inspection revealed the larger number. The long frozen region, Arctic, is shifting to an entirely new climate regime after facing escalating trends of ice melt, temperature rise and rainfall delays. The recent ice melting is expected to be the second lowest expanse in 4 decades of recorded keeping. Details in this report.
Over the past 30 years, the Arctic has warmed at roughly twice the rate than the entire globe, a phenomenon known as Arctic amplification. Most scientists agree that this rapid warming is a sign of human-caused climate change driving up temperatures of Arctic Circle. The solid ice cover has been shrinking to new lows in recent years. Scientists aboard a Greenpeace research vessel say the dwindling ice cover means an uncertain future for animals like seals and polar bears.
It just shows us how rapidly and how profoundly this area is changing. And the Arctic is an incredibly special habitat for so many species. So we know that the distributions of these species is going to change. Some species, unfortunately, will die out in years to come, and others will invade this area. And we really don't know what the impact of these changes are going to be in the future.
A recent study revealed this year Arctic sea ice lost about 2/3 of its bulk. Much of the thicker ice layer built up over years has long since melted away. Ice coverage is about 31% lower than in a decade after 1979.
The numbers that we're getting in terms of the decrease in sea ice extent every single year put us pretty much on red alert in terms of the level of worry that we have, our concern for the stability of this environment.
Environment experts say changes are occurring faster than climate models have ever predicted. Implementing the necessary reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and reducing global warming are essential to ensure sea ice-packed Arctic.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. European stocks have tumbled as allegations surrounding bank dealings and rising coronavirus infections weigh on market sentiment around the world. The pan-European stock 600 dropped 2%, with banks plummeting over 4.5% and travel stocks falling nearly 5%. London's FTSE plunged over 3%, while Italy's FTSE MIB slid almost 3%. Frankfurt's DAX lost nearly 3%. In Paris, the CAC 40 also dived nearly 3%. US stocks have fallen sharply as fears about the worsening coronavirus and uncertainty on further fiscal stimulus rattled traders. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is trading lower by about 3%. The S&P 500 is trading lower by over 2%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index is trading about 2.5% lower. Meanwhile, oil prices fell with the possible return of Libyan production, and rising coronavirus cases stoked worries about global demand. In the English Premier League, Liverpool beat Chelsea 2-0 at the empty Stamford Bridge in London. Sadio Mane scored a brace for the defending champions. Chelsea's Andreas Christensen was sent off after a challenge on an unstoppable Mane. He then punished Chelsea with 2 swift goals to seal 3 points for Liverpool. In another fixture, Brighton crushed Newcastle 3-0 at St James Park Stadium. Neil Maupay scored a brace, while Aaron Connolly added 1 for Brighton. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.